Hi guys, today we're going to talk about Swiss drumming and Swiss rudiments as we have been for the past couple of months. I'm not going to promo my book at all, don't worry, but we're going to talk about how to determine when a rudiment is really Swiss and when it is fake Swiss. And by fake Swiss I mean here in America we call it Swiss and we list it with the Swiss rudiments, but it is not from Switzerland, it is an American hybrid. And this actually happens a lot. It is more common than most people realize. If you look at any hybrid rudiment list, things on there will present themselves as being Swiss, and most of the time they are not Swiss. And so I just want to clear that up. So the problem of fake Swiss rudiments really started in the 1970s, as far as I can tell, when core style books and articles about core style drumming started to list Swiss rudiments separately from the Nard 26 rudiments. So basically they did have some Swiss rudiments on there. Classic Swiss rudiments that we did use and still continue to use include the Swiss Army triplet, the single flammed mill, the patafla-fla, although that's the French name for it, and any kind of a flammed roll, but specifically the flammed 5 and the flammed 9. So those are 5 rudiments that we use today, 3 of which are on the PAS sheet, and they are very Swiss. They're from Switzerland, or they get used in Switzerland a lot, so referring to them as Swiss rudiments, not that weird. We have a whole bunch of other rudiments that have Swiss sounding names, or that people just list in categories of Swiss rudiments, but they have nothing to do with Switzerland. So when we talk about fake Swiss rudiments, they're real rudiments, they're hybrids, they're fine, play them if you want, but they're not Swiss. So examples include the alternating 4-note Swiss Army triplet, the cheese Swiss triple paradiddle, the Swiss tuchata, the Swiss-a-diddle, the triple flammed Swiss Army triplet, or the triple para-Swiss flam drag. I could go on for a while, I won't. But all these things have like Swiss in the name, but they're not from Switzerland, and they often get lumped into a category with the real rudiments from Switzerland that we just talked about. And this happened more so in the past, but it still happens today, where anything with Swiss in the name, and in fact some patterns without Swiss in the name, just get put in this category of Swiss because they're kind of weird. So if you encounter a rudiment in a list somewhere that says it's a Swiss rudiment, and you're like, I don't know, is that Swiss? Here's a few ways that you can sort of logically tell if it's probably Swiss or probably not Swiss. The first way is if it has Swiss in the name, it's not Swiss. The one exception to this, the Swiss Army triplet, which isn't its name in Switzerland, but that is a Swiss rudiment. Everything else with Swiss in the name that I've ever seen is not Swiss. It's an American hybrid. So right there, that's a red flag. The next thing that you can look for is the name in English at all. If it's an English name, you might want to be suspicious because, of course, in Switzerland they speak French, German, and a little bit less or so Italian, and all the rudiments are typically named in German or French. So if it doesn't have a German or French looking name, it's probably not Swiss. That doesn't guarantee that it's not. It could be translated. If it does have a Swiss or German name, or a French name, then it could be Swiss. It doesn't guarantee that it is, but the chances are better. The next way you can tell is if it has any like classic hybrid words, you know, that we associate with hybrid rudiments in the name, it's not Swiss. So examples of this would be things like cheese, chutata, pagoda, herta, tuchata, you know, these hybrid sounding terms. They do not use them in Switzerland. They do not have any equivalent in Switzerland. So that's a red flag right there. That's definitely an American hybrid and not a Swiss rudiment. So if you add that up, if it's got an American name, if it uses weird rudimental terminology from hybrid American rudiments, and if it has Swiss in the name, definitely not a Swiss rudiment, really. And if it has a German or French name, it could be Swiss. It doesn't guarantee that it is, but the chances are better. So why do we care? Well, really, it's because Swiss rudiments is actually, as we know, 2 separate groups of rudimental drumming in different styles, and that's already interesting in and of itself. We don't have to add fake Swiss rudiments into the mix to make Swiss drumming cool and interesting. I think it's worth learning on its own, both the military style and the Basel style, and it's really cool. You can use it in extremely interesting ways. It's actually related to the way that drumming was played in America in like the 1800s and before, more so than the drumming of today, which is kind of cool. You can get a little historical lens into some of the things we might have done in some cases. So I think we should just keep everything separate and label it what it is. If it's an American hybrid, don't call it Swiss, and if it's a Swiss classic rudiment, call it Swiss, and if you don't care, then you don't care. But if you have any interest at all in accuracy, we're going to call Swiss rudiments Swiss and American rudiments American or hybrid, and it's just a different thing. So that's it. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.